In 2017, as the American Me Too movement revealed a tidal wave of sexual abuse allegations in some of the most powerful and protected industries in the U.S., a young Taiwanese writer named Lin Yi-Han quietly dropped a bomb of her own when she released her debut novel, Fang Chee's First Love Paradise, a chilling story about a predatory school tutor who uses Taiwan's competitive academic culture to groom and abuse one of his young teenage students.
It's rooted in a lot of real-life experiences because there were so many people being called out last year in the 2023 Taiwanese Me Too movement. It's not just in educational environments, but also in the art industry, film industry, and political circles.
When translator Jenna Tang read Yi-Han's novel and witnessed the explosive impact it had on her native Taiwan, she made it her mission to share it with the world. Yi-Han herself paid a terrible price for her courage in exposing Taiwan's student sexual abuse crisis. Soon after her book was published, at the age of 26, Lin Yi-Han died by suicide, making Fang Chee's First Love Paradise her first and only published novel.
Jenna Tang, thank you so much for joining us. This is so unlike anything that I've ever read or even done an interview for, in that you are actually representing this book for the original author. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey translating Fang Chee's First Love Paradise. I really loved the process, even though the themes are heavy and dark at times. But I'm so happy that it's finally coming to publication. There's so much I want to say through translating this book, Me Too movement, gender identity issues. There's so much more, but I'm just excited that this book is finally out in the world.
What is First Love Paradise about?
So First Love Paradise is about two girls sharing a twin-like friendship. The characters are Liu Yiting and Fang Chi. So both of them live in a high-rise apartment building, like some kind of luxury building with their family, and they receive like very, very quality kind of education. There were a lot of attention putting on them, and it's talking about one of them, Fang Chi, the character, being sexually groomed by her cram school teacher, and went through all these sexual abuse, sexual violence, and all these experiences throughout years. And eventually, no spoilers here, but it's talking about that journey of her. And there were several women mentioned in the novel who also went through similar experiences, and also domestic violence, which is from one of their neighbors, Yi-Wen, which is often mentioned. And all three of them enjoyed literature together. And that First Love Paradise here is talking about their shared love and bond for languages and literature, but also their shared experiences of being sexually abused.
The main characters in this novel grew up in a very rarefied world, these almost luxury apartment buildings, right? But they are like communities. When the story opens, we see sort of the beauty of that. You grow up together, your best friend is sort of on another floor, and you have this community. And yet, it was also sort of what made this fertile ground for the real tragedy of what the story is about.
It is also about educational environments and settings in Taiwan that we all want our kids to be in a good environment to learn things and get to good college, or maybe going overseas to study. And so there's this system that's called cram school. And cram school is an after-school program where we pick any subjects we want to improve on, like it could be math, Chinese, or anything. And in this case, it's talking about the Chinese literature part of the education. So going to these programs, like some people can go to group classes, and others who are able to afford it, they will hire tutors that teach one-on-one. And the book is also addressing to these kind of competitive educational system that allows these things to happen. Because there's also like safety, like what is the boundary of, like teachers-student relationship. And all that. So it's talking about the sexual abuse that could happen under this kind of circumstance.
This is a novel, but it's rooted in the real experiences of so many young girls and young women in Taiwan. And the experience that we see the main character, Fang Xixi, go through has such a haunting familiarity in terms of how she was groomed, that I know when the novel came out, just sent shockwaves.
Yeah, it was. So in Taiwan, it wasn't uncommon for young girls or anyone to experience something like that, or even people who don't identify as biological women. So these kind of things, because there's so much like closed space in different educational environments, that is kind of out of reach for someone else if the person doesn't speak up, and that's complicated because like not everyone are capable of speaking up right away. So it's rooted in a lot of real life experiences because there were so many people being called out last year in the 2023 Taiwanese Me Too movement. It's not just in educational environments, but also in the art industry, film industry, and political circles. And there's actually a Netflix series, it's called Wave Maker, that's actually based on all these series of sexual harassment and sexual aggression. And that was out in Netflix right now. That's talking about the Me Too in Taiwan. And so this book pretty much like participates in a flow of calling out all these predators, and all these predators' names were called out in the public media. And I've seen some of my like past professors like being on the list as well. Except like I maybe was lucky enough to not have the experience, but it was very shocking.
This book was really an earthquake when it came out.
Yes, for sure.
I'm curious to know, how did parents in Taiwan, and especially in this sort of socioeconomic income group, which is upper middle class and very focused on achievement and education, how did they react?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question because when this book first came out and all these Me Too movement that followed suit, like a lot of parents, I don't know if something has changed by the way parents like create an educational environment for their kids. I have no idea. I feel like it just varies from parents to parents. For my parents, they simply just look at the news of Me Too and be like, oh, all these people are guilty. And that's pretty much what I heard. But because I'm no longer in school and I no longer need the same kind of educational attention anymore, so it was hard for me to tell like what their stance really were. But I feel like a lot of people just looked at it and be like, oh, these like maybe this we should avoid this cram school, or we should avoid this school, and something like that, where they followed some of the news that they felt more relevant to where they live. Because Taiwan is such a small world, like you could know someone, like you could just be 2 people away from someone. So I feel like a lot of people are trying to find that relevance and connection and see how close they are to, like quote unquote danger. But rather, I also translated this book hoping that people would see things like this in a much bigger way.
Tell me how you came to this project.
So when I first heard about this book, it was first published in 2017 in Taiwan in Mandarin. And when it first came out, I was actually on a train from Lyon to Paris. I was studying translation at a time and was kind of traveling a little bit. And then I was planning on my trip back to Taiwan fairly soon. So I was looking at books that I may want to read. And this book came to my attention. And it was a lot about, like feminist movement, Me Too, and ways to different perspectives to look at sexual violence. And there's also like a lot of abstraction and stream of consciousness in this novel. So all these elements like intrigued me. And so by the time I got back to Taiwan, I started reading this novel, and it was one of the most like refreshing reads I've ever read. It's just different from, like the conventional novels like going in chronological order, story, plots, and so on. It doesn't really have the conventional plot. We're more following the characters instead of following some kind of plot in a novel. So, but it wasn't until 2020. It was during the pandemic, and I was freshly graduated from my MFA program in New York, that I was taking part in some translation workshop. And in a workshop, it was actually by the famous translator, Bruna Donis Lovato. I was in her workshop, and we had sort of just trying to find our own projects to start with. So I started with this one because it just grappled with me. And I remember this book throughout the time I wasn't rereading it. So I started that, and then I started to get involved in the literary translators community in the U.S. And so this book, I received like a 9-month mentorship from ALTA, the American Literary Translators Association, to finish this project. So I was working with Mike Fu, who's the translator of San Mao's Stories of a Sahara. And just all through these years, like I was translating and then also trying to pitch the book to different publishers. And after pitching it to over 30 publishers, finally Harper Via acquired the book.
When you started all of this, you had no promise of anything professionally, really. But it was so important to you.
Yeah, it was very important to me because I don't really know the author herself. I just knew that we were in the same university for a while and around the same time. But I just feel like because in Taiwan there's so much attention on like very inappropriate contents about the author, and also there was sort of also harassing the author and her family. And I didn't like what I was seeing because I feel like it's a lot of things that are just really inappropriate, that I really want this book and the author to have a chance of letting this world see what this book really is.
Lin Yi-Han died by suicide soon after this novel was published. It was her only novel.
Yeah, this is her one and only novel.
She was very young. I would imagine that for you, it just became a story and a project that you couldn't turn away from, that you couldn't not take forward for her.
Part of my process as a translator is obsession. Like the moment I started translating, I just couldn't stop, and I like didn't sleep, and I just wanted to finish some text where sometimes research were involved. Sometimes it's about like the Chinese classical language references that I want to make sure I understand the original and also what the novel might mean with this quote, and so on and so forth. So I just went down a rabbit hole and finished the first draft in 3 months. And then after that, it was more about revisiting the draft, and maybe there are some parts I want to retweak it. There's just many editing process along the way before it was like formally being acquired.
When you got your hands on this novel and opened it and started reading it, what did you experience and how did it hit you, just even emotionally and intellectually, as you read the story that she was presenting?
I was very much like emotionally impacted, and there were days that I feel like things were just really dark and I was really depressed. And then I realized I work on a draft for too long in a day. Then I'll have to do something else to distract myself, or I take a break. And because one part of, I think it was her prose instead of her novel, that in the prose, it writes about this character like go into the closet. Like she would hide herself in the closet like several days a week because she was going through a lot of emotional journeys there. And so I did an experiment and I hid myself in a closet. That felt really claustrophobic. But most of the time I was trying to simulate that experience, like what does it feel like, what kind of air she's breathing. But I didn't do that again because it was way too depressing.
How did girls or young women, I should say, react to it coming out?
In Taiwan specifically, like a lot of girls that happen to be my friends or people I've talked to, they said this is too horrible to read for them. Some of them didn't even open the cover. They just learn about a book and about what it's roughly about, and they decide not to read it, which is also valid. Like some books go to certain audiences and some doesn't. But because Taiwan is such a small world, the teacher inside could remind someone of another teacher they've heard of before. Like I've known that sometimes like when friends told me about someone, like it just happened to be 2 people away. So this novel for Taiwanese audiences can be too close to their lives. They could have gone to the same to some cram school with a teacher like that, or things like that. It's too close.
How did you become a translator?
My parents speak 2 different dialects, Hakka and Taiwanese Hokkien. So I grew up listening to Hakka most of the time because I live mostly with my paternal family. Mandarin Chinese is our official language. And then everyone in Taiwan, like kids, we're all told to learn English because everyone wants to send their kids to America. After that, in high school, I started German, French, and Spanish because I was just exploring like what kind of languages do I have a life with, or do I want my career to be with. Just in the process of just loving languages, I feel like each language like opens a whole new world for me, and it allows me to see so many other things in different perspectives and through different accents because of knowing the language. And I also love traveling, so I guess all this just like without me realizing, like I became capable of translating materials, like either technical and later on just like this, like literary translation coming out. So I used to work as subtitle translator somewhere in Taiwan, and I later quit because I didn't like the way it's making me watch the show and so on. But I've just been in different fields, like translating different stuff, like legal documents, technical translations, and then later on with books. And I just feel like being able to see that textures and lines and threads of connection between languages is really interesting for me. And I just love translation and languages. And so after I graduated from the MFA program, I was involved in ALTA, the American Literary Translators Association community, and later got to know so many amazing translators who I addressed to in my translator's note, that I gradually find myself officially become a literary translator.
Beyond the author's short life, this book has taken on a life of its own. How have you seen it impacting and is it changing things?
It is changing things, and I love that you say it's taking on it's like living. This book has a life and energy that we really feel it. And because of this book, like every time there's a Me Too movement in Taiwan, like another wave of it, like it's being mentioned again and again. And I also mentioned somewhere, like maybe in my article or something, I've been talking about like this is one of the books that really speak for the Taiwanese Me Too movement, but there are so many other books that are also doing the same thing. And I'm currently working with another author called Liu Zhiyu, also from Taiwan. And she has this short story collection already published that's also talking about the day-to-day observations of sexual aggressions or sexual harassment in Taiwan, like in a subway or in a school setting or in a gym, things like that. It goes into very nuanced details, but in a way to bring out what life is like to be women or to be different genders in Taiwan.
Wow, so even beyond this book being written, your own work as a translator is now opening up a new pathway for these issues to be heard.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey, and I really love that because of this book, I also discover other books, and I started to pay attention to like different aspects of Taiwanese literature and to get to know other authors. And sometimes it was interesting to hear what other authors in Taiwan think of this book.
What do they think?
A lot of them also commented that this is really heavy for them, but they also see the importance and literary merits of the book. And some of them share their experiences of having met her in literary occasions in Taiwan back in time when she was kind of like doing her own interview. There's an interview of her talking about this book in Mandarin on YouTube that everyone will have access to. And she shared a lot of what she thought was important in this book. There's a lot to unpack, but I think I've covered most of it, like in our conversations already.
What do you want readers to walk away knowing or understanding better after reading First Love Paradise?
Great question, and I feel like I really want readers. Of course, I can tell them how to feel or how to think, but at the same time, I really hope that this book would make a lot of people feel less alone. That these issues are being talked about, and this is something we can actually find ways to talk about in a healthier way instead of like keeping it in the dark. And this is like something we barely talk about. I think just putting this topic in this book out in the world and to have like just foster that energy of like a healthier conversation would be really helpful. And I hope that more people would feel like they're never alone and that they can always talk about things. And there's a presence of this book that's trying to do the work as well.
Do you feel like this book will hopefully begin to change things for the next generation of young women in Taiwan?
Yeah, I hope so. And I also hope that it also fosters a conversation that anyone of any gender can experience sexual violence, and that it's not just about feminist movement, even though it is a part of it. And I hope it expands the conversation in very different ways.
One of the things that's very clear when the book opens is how controlled their world is, the young girls in this book, and all of the women depicted, that things are very predictable within their lives. And yet, what's something like that should have controlled for danger instead made it almost easier.
Yeah, it was the kind of life I was living when I was in Taiwan, because we were boxed in that kind of educational system that exams, achievements, especially academic achievements, were everything for us. And our routine was just going to school, coming back home, or maybe we'll go to cram school. We were just hovering around different classes overall. And I remember I was feeling very unhappy about it. So a little part of it, translating this book, that I felt seen myself is that, that part of life was being seen. That this educational setting it's not building the happiest environment for a lot of people.
So it almost sort of explained things that didn't sit well with you while you were going through it.
Yeah, it also speaks to why I decided to leave Taiwan, and find a job in the U.S. and do something different that makes me feel like I'm no longer in that box.
Why is it so important for this story to be read universally and globally?
I think it's for this book to take part in the Me Too conversation. Like, we shouldn't let Me Too conversation to stop in any ways, because we're forgetful human beings and we need reminders over and over. And so there are so many other books that also talk about Me Too in different ways, like Sherry Ito's Black Box from Japan. And there's also Kim Ji-young, born 1982, from Korea, that was translated by Jamie, and The Black Box was translated by Alison Markin Powell. Both are really very much like in conversation with this book as well. So I feel like this book was so important in Taiwan, but it's also like I hope it joins like the international conversations about gender.
Right, this is not just a Taiwanese story.
Yes. It's by translating it, I hope it's able to participate in so much more conversations.
Do you feel like this was meant to be, that you were meant to be the translator, that this was meant to happen the way it has?
I never thought too much about it before I translated it, but now it feels like I really enjoy sharing this bond with this book because of my love for translation and languages. And I just hope that it reaches as many readers as possible, and I'm grateful for everyone who opened the book and start any kind of conversation about the topics.
Jenna Tang, thank you so much for speaking with us and for sharing this beautiful novel with us as well.
And thank you so much for reading.
一句话来结束，就是怡婷她在回顾整个大楼故事的时候，她有一句心里话，她说她恍然觉得不是学文学的人，而是文学辜负了他们。